The power went out at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in February, and I knew immediately that my wife's medical equipment was going to be a problem. I lived in Meadowbrook Heights, a planned community outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, where the houses all looked vaguely similar, and the HOA ruled with an iron fist. My name is Ethan Turner, and I had been living there for 3 years with my wife, who had a chronic respiratory condition that required a ventilator at night. When the power company called to inform us that a transformer had blown and repairs wouldn't be completed until morning, I didn't hesitate. I went straight to my garage and wheeled out the portable generator I kept for exactly this kind of emergency. The generator wasn't particularly loud, at least not by generator standards. It was a newer model, one of those inverter types that ran quieter than the old-school ones. I set it up on the side of my house, as far from my neighbors as possible, plugged in the extension cords, and got my wife's equipment running again. She was already struggling to breathe, her fingers gripping the bedsheets as I worked quickly to restore power to her ventilator. When the machine hummed back to life, I saw the relief wash over her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle whir of the machine. "Don't worry about it," I said, kissing her forehead. "Just rest. Everything's going to be fine." I checked the generator one more time, making sure it was stable and running smoothly, then went back inside. The whole neighborhood was dark, streetlights out, houses pitch black. I figured everyone would understand that medical equipment took priority over a quiet night's sleep. I was wrong. At 12:23 a.m., my doorbell rang. I was sitting in the living room with a flashlight, trying to read a book while keeping an ear out for any problems with the generator. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with Patricia Henderson, the president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. She was in her late 40s, with blonde hair that looked like it had been styled specifically to speak to managers, and an expression of pure indignation on her face. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice sharp and clipped, "do you have any idea what time it is?" "Just after midnight," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Can I help you with something?" "You most certainly can. That generator you're running is violating multiple HOA bylaws. Section 7, Paragraph 3 specifically prohibits the operation of noise-generating equipment between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. I'm going to have to ask you to shut it down immediately." I stared at her for a moment, genuinely unsure if she was serious. "Mrs. Henderson, the power is out. My wife needs her medical equipment to breathe. The generator stays on." Her eyes narrowed. "I understand that you may have certain personal circumstances, but the rules apply to everyone equally. There are no exceptions. If you don't shut down that generator within the next 10 minutes, I'll have no choice but to report this violation to the board and assess the appropriate fines." "You want me to turn off my wife's ventilator?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "Are you hearing yourself right now?" "I'm simply enforcing the community standards that you agreed to when you purchased your home here," she said primly. "Perhaps you should have considered a different neighborhood if you couldn't abide by our regulations." "Get off my property," I said, starting to close the door. She stuck her foot in the doorway. "Mr. Turner, I'm warning you. If that generator is still running in 10 minutes, there will be consequences." "Move your foot or I'll move it for you," I said, my patience completely exhausted. She pulled back, her face flushing red. "You'll regret this. Mark my words." I closed the door and locked it, my hands shaking with anger. Through the window, I watched her storm back across the dark street to her house, her phone already pressed to her ear. I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. 20 minutes later, I saw the flashing lights through my window. 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house, their lights cutting through the darkness of the powerless neighborhood. I took a deep breath, checked on my wife one more time to make sure she was sleeping peacefully, and went to answer the door. The officer who knocked was young, maybe in his late 20s, with a tired expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. His name tag read Officer Martinez. "Evening, sir," he said. "We got a call about a noise complaint, something about a generator." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Let me explain the situation." Officer Martinez and his partner, an older woman named Officer Sullivan, followed me inside. I showed them my wife's medical equipment, explained her condition, and walked them through exactly why the generator was necessary. "The power company said it won't be back on until at least 7 a.m., I explained. "I can't turn it off. My wife needs that ventilator to breathe." Officer Martinez nodded slowly, his expression sympathetic. "I understand, sir. And honestly, this seems like a pretty clear-cut case of medical necessity. Can you show me the generator?" We walked outside, and I led them to the side of the house where the generator was running. It wasn't silent, but it wasn't particularly loud either. You could hear it from the street, but it was more of a low hum than a roar. "This is what all the fuss is about?" Officer Sullivan asked, raising an eyebrow. "Apparently," I said. "The HOA president came by earlier and demanded I shut it down." Officer Martinez pulled out a small decibel meter from his belt and took a reading. 52 decibels from here, probably less from the street. That's about as loud as a normal conversation. "Sir, you're well within your rights to run this generator, especially given the medical circumstances." "Try telling that to Mrs. Henderson," I muttered. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Patricia appeared from across the street, practically jogging over to us. She was still fully dressed despite the late hour, and I realized she'd probably been waiting by her window for the police to arrive. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she said breathlessly. "This man is flagrantly violating our community standards and disturbing the peace. I need you to make him shut down that generator immediately." Officer Sullivan turned to face her, and I caught the slightest hint of annoyance in her expression. "Madam, we've assessed the situation. Mr. Turner has a legitimate medical need for this generator, and the noise level is well within acceptable limits. There's no violation here." "No violation." Patricia's voice rose to a near shriek. "He's breaking our HOA bylaws. Those are legally binding documents." "HOA bylaws don't override medical necessity," Officer Martinez said firmly. "Madam, I need you to understand that Mr. Turner is operating this generator to keep his wife's life support equipment running. If you continue to harass him about this, you could be charged with interfering with medical care." Patricia's mouth fell open. "Harassing him? I'm the one being harassed here. The noise is keeping me awake." "Then I suggest you use earplugs," Officer Sullivan said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Mr. Turner, you're fine to continue running your generator as long as you need to. Madam, I'm going to strongly advise you to go back to your house and let this go." "I will do no such thing." Patricia sputtered. "I'm calling my lawyer first thing in the morning. This is completely unacceptable." Officer Martinez stepped closer to Patricia, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Madam, let me be very clear. If you continue to harass Mr. Turner over a legitimate medical necessity, you could face charges yourself. Harassment, disturbing the peace, possibly even reckless endangerment if your actions result in the generator being shut off. I strongly suggest you drop this matter and go home." Patricia looked between the two officers, apparently realizing that this wasn't going the way she'd planned. "Fine," she said icily. "But this isn't over. The HOA board will be hearing about this, and you can expect a formal complaint filed against you, Mr. Turner." She turned on her heel and marched back to her house, her posture rigid with fury. Officer Martinez watched her go, then turned back to me with a sympathetic expression. "I'm sorry about this, Mr. Turner. Unfortunately, we get a lot of calls about HOA disputes. Most of them are just as petty as this one." "Thank you for being reasonable," I said, genuinely relieved. "I was worried for a minute there." "Just doing our job," Officer Sullivan said. "Keep that generator running as long as you need it. And if she bothers you again tonight, don't hesitate to call us. At that point, it becomes criminal harassment." They left a few minutes later, and I went back inside, exhausted but grateful. The power came back on around 6:30 a.m., just as the sun was starting to rise. I shut down the generator, coiled up the extension cords, and wheeled everything back into the garage. My wife was still sleeping peacefully, her ventilator now running on house power. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. 3 days later, I found an official notice from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA in my mailbox. It was a violation letter, informing me that I had broken community standards by operating noise-generating equipment during quiet hours, and that I was being fined $500. Furthermore, if I operated the generator during quiet hours again, the fine would increase to $1,000 per occurrence. I read the letter 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. They were actually going to fine me for keeping my wife alive. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive in its cruelty. I called the HOA office immediately. A bored-sounding woman answered on the 4th ring. "Meadowbrook Heights HOA, this is Donna speaking. This is Ethan Turner on Maple Court. I just received a violation notice that I need to discuss with someone. All violation notices are reviewed by the board before being sent out, Mr. Turner. If you'd like to appeal, you'll need to submit a written request and attend the next board meeting." "When's the next board meeting?" 2 weeks from yesterday, 7 p.m. at the community center." "Fine. I'll be there." I spent the next 2 weeks preparing my case. I gathered documentation of my wife's medical condition, letters from her doctors explaining the necessity of her equipment, information about the legal protections for medical devices in North Carolina, and a recording of the generator's actual noise level. I even researched previous court cases where HOAs had been sued for interfering with medical care. I wasn't going down without a fight. The community center was packed when I arrived for the board meeting. Apparently, HOA meetings were something of a spectator sport in Meadowbrook Heights, attended by the same group of busybodies who had nothing better to do than meddle in other people's business. Patricia sat at the head table with 4 other board members, all of them looking equally self-important. The meeting started with standard business. They approved the minutes from the last meeting, discussed the budget for landscaping, and debated whether to repaint the community pool house. It was mind-numbingly boring, and I could feel my patience wearing thin as the minutes ticked by. Finally, after nearly an hour, Patricia cleared her throat. "Now we come to new business. Mr. Ethan Turner has submitted an appeal regarding a violation notice. Mr. Turner, you have 5 minutes to present your case." I stood up, my folder of documentation in hand. "Thank you." On February 14th, the power went out in our neighborhood due to a transformer failure. My wife has a chronic respiratory condition and requires a ventilator to breathe while she sleeps. When the power went out, I immediately set up a generator to keep her medical equipment running. This wasn't a convenience, it was a medical necessity. "The bylaws don't make exceptions for personal circumstances," Patricia interrupted. "Actually, federal and state law supersedes HOA bylaws when it comes to medical necessity." I continued. The Fair Housing Act requires reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. Running a generator to power life-saving medical equipment during a power outage is not only reasonable, it's essential. One of the other board members, a man in his 60s named Donald, leaned forward. But surely you could have made other arrangements. Gone to a hotel, perhaps, or to the hospital. At midnight, with no warning, while my wife was already in respiratory distress. And incur thousands of dollars in emergency medical costs when I had a perfectly functional generator at home. That's not reasonable, and you know it. Patricia's face was flushed red. The point is that you disturbed your neighbors. We have rules for a reason, Mr. Turner. Everyone in this community agrees to abide by them. I have statements from the police officers who responded that night, I said, pulling out the paperwork. They measured the generator at 52 decibels, which is about as loud as a normal conversation. There's no legal definition of disturbing the peace at that noise level. Furthermore, they explicitly told Mrs. Henderson that she could face harassment charges if she continued to pursue this matter. That caused a stir in the room. Several people started whispering to each other. Patricia banged her gavel on the table. Order. Mr. Turner, are you threatening this board? I'm informing you of the legal reality, I said calmly. If you enforce this fine, I will sue this HOA for violating the Fair Housing Act, and I will win. Furthermore, I'll seek damages for the harassment and emotional distress you've caused both me and my wife, who is already dealing with a serious medical condition. Another board member, a woman named Susan, spoke up. Perhaps we should table this discussion and consult with our lawyer before proceeding. I don't think that's necessary, Patricia said sharply. The rules are clear. Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, Mr. Turner makes some valid legal points, Donald said. If he's right about the Fair Housing Act, we could be opening the HOA up to significant liability. He's bluffing, Patricia insisted. He's just trying to intimidate us into backing down. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I'm not bluffing. I've already consulted with a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes and disability rights. He's reviewed the case and is prepared to file suit if necessary. Would you like me to read his email? The room fell silent. Patricia looked like she wanted to reach across the table and strangle me, but she managed to maintain her composure. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. We'll table this matter until we can consult with our attorney. But Mr. Turner, if you run that generator again during quiet hours, there will be consequences. If the power goes out again, I will absolutely run my generator, I said firmly. My wife's life takes precedence over your sleep schedule. If that bothers you, I suggest you take it up with your lawyer. I gathered my papers and walked out, leaving behind a room full of shocked faces and angry whispers. As I drove home, I felt a mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. I'd made my point, but I knew this wasn't over. People like Patricia didn't give up easily. Over the next few weeks, things were tense but quiet. The HOA's lawyer apparently advised them that pursuing the matter would be a losing proposition, and the fine was quietly dropped. I thought maybe Patricia had finally gotten the message and would leave me alone. Then the petty harassment started. It began with parking violations. Suddenly, I was getting notices that my car was parked 3 inches too far from the curb, or that I'd left my garage door open for longer than the permitted 2 hours. Then came notices about my lawn, claiming that my grass was a 1/4 inch too long, or that there were weeds in my flower bed. Every single violation came with a fine, and every single one was clearly fabricated or wildly exaggerated. I documented everything, took photos with timestamps, and kept copies of all the notices. I knew what Patricia was doing. She couldn't get me on the generator, so she was going to nickel and dime me with bogus violations until I either gave up or moved out. My wife noticed the toll it was taking on me. "Maybe we should just move," she said one evening, her voice weak but concerned. "This stress isn't good for you." "We're not moving," I said firmly. "We chose this house for good reasons. It's close to your doctor's, it's in a good school district for when we hopefully have kids someday, and we love this neighborhood. I'm not going to let some power-hungry HOA president drive us out of our home." But the harassment continued. I started getting notices about the color of my mailbox, claiming it didn't match the approved palette. My outdoor lights were allegedly too bright. The wreath on my front door was supposedly a violation of the decoration policy. It was absurd, and it was relentless. I filed complaints with the HOA board, pointing out the obvious pattern of harassment, but they either ignored them or sent back form letter responses stating that all violations were legitimate and fines were appropriately assessed. Patricia had the board in her pocket, and they weren't going to stand up to her. After 2 months of this nonsense, I'd accumulated over $3,000 in fines. I hadn't paid a single one, and the threatening letters were piling up. According to their bylaws, if I didn't pay within 90 days, they could file a lien against my property. I called my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who had been advising me throughout this ordeal. "They're really going through with it," I told him. "They're threatening to lien my house." "Let them," Marcus said calmly. "At that point, we have grounds for a harassment lawsuit that will make them wish they'd backed off months ago. Keep documenting everything. Every notice, every fine, every interaction. We're building a case that's going to be impossible for them to defend against." "I just want them to leave me alone," I said, frustration evident in my voice. "I know. And after we're done with them, they will. Trust me." 2 days later, the power went out again. This time it was a spring storm that knocked down power lines across half the county. The power company estimated repairs would take at least 24 hours, maybe longer. I didn't hesitate. I set up the generator, plugged in my wife's equipment, and settled in for what I knew was going to be another confrontation with Patricia. She didn't disappoint. At 11:15 p.m., she was at my door, her face twisted with rage. "I knew you'd do this," she hissed. "I absolutely knew it. You're running that generator just to spite me, aren't you?" "I'm running the generator to keep my wife alive," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Now get off my property before I call the police." "You won't need to. I'm calling them myself. We'll see what they have to say this time." "Great. I'll make sure to mention how you've been harassing me for the past 3 months. I'm sure they'll find it very interesting." She pulled out her phone and dialed, maintaining eye contact with me the whole time. "Yes, police. I need to report a noise disturbance at 742 Maple Court. My neighbor is running a generator that's disturbing the entire neighborhood. It's after 11 p.m. and the noise is unbearable." I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. About 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. To my relief, it was Officer Martinez again, along with a different partner this time. "Mr. Turner," Officer Martinez said, recognition in his eyes. "Let me guess, generator." "Generator," I confirmed. "Power's out, wife needs her medical equipment. Same situation as last time." Officer Martinez nodded and turned to Patricia. "Madam, didn't we already go through this a few months ago? This is a different situation," Patricia insisted. "He's been running that generator every chance he gets, deliberately violating our community standards. It's harassment." "Madam, is the power out in your house too?" Officer Martinez asked. "Well, yes, but that's not the point." "That's exactly the point. Mr. Turner has a legitimate reason to run his generator. We've been over this." Officer Martinez pulled out his notepad. Actually, Mr. Turner, have you been having ongoing issues with the HOA? You could say that, I said. Mrs. Henderson has been issuing bogus violation notices for the past 3 months. I've got all the documentation inside if you want to see it. Officer Martinez's expression hardened. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to say this one more time. Mr. Turner is operating his generator for a legitimate medical necessity. If you continue to harass him over this, I will arrest you for criminal harassment. Do you understand? Patricia's face went pale, then red, then pale again. You can't arrest me for enforcing HOA bylaws. I absolutely can arrest you for harassment, which is what this has become. This is your final warning. Leave Mr. Turner alone or face charges. This is ridiculous, Patricia sputtered. I'm calling my lawyer. You do that, Officer Martinez said. In the meantime, go home and stop bothering your neighbors. Patricia opened her mouth to argue further, but Officer Martinez's expression made it clear that he was done listening. She turned and stalked back to her house, muttering angrily under her breath. Officer Martinez turned back to me. Mr. Turner, I'm going to file a report about this incident. If she continues to harass you, we'll have documentation of a pattern of behavior. Don't hesitate to call us if she bothers you again. Thank you, officer. I really appreciate your help with this. After the police left, I went back inside and checked on my wife. She was awake, having been disturbed by all the commotion. Was that Patricia again? She asked. Yeah, but the police set her straight. She's been warned that she'll be arrested if she keeps this up. My wife reached out and took my hand. I'm so sorry you're dealing with all this because of me. Don't apologize. This isn't your fault. Patricia is just a bully who can't stand the idea that someone isn't following her rules. But she's going to learn that she can't push people around indefinitely. The power came back on the next afternoon, and I shut down the generator. I half expected another violation notice to show up in my mailbox, but days passed with nothing. Then a week. I started to think that maybe Officer Martinez's warning had finally gotten through to Patricia. Then I got served with a lawsuit. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA was suing me for unpaid fines and fees totaling $4,200, plus legal costs. They were also seeking an injunction preventing me from operating the generator during quiet hours under any circumstances. I immediately forwarded everything to Marcus. He called me back within an hour. Perfect, he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. They just handed us exactly what we need. We're going to file a countersuit for harassment, violations of the Fair Housing Act, and emotional distress. We're also going to request that the court invalidate every single one of those fines and order the HOA to pay your legal fees. Will it work? I asked. Ethan, I'm 99% confident we're going to win this. The documentation you've provided is extensive, and the pattern of harassment is undeniable. Plus, they made the crucial mistake of seeking an injunction against medical equipment. No judge is going to side with them on that. The lawsuit took months to wind through the court system. During that time, the harassment from the HOA actually intensified. More violation notices, more fines, more threats. Patricia apparently thought that if she could just bury me under enough paperwork and fees, I'd give up and settle. She badly underestimated my stubbornness. My wife's health fluctuated during this period. There were good days and bad days, but through it all, she remained supportive and encouraging. We're going to get through this, she'd tell me on the bad nights. And when we do, that horrible woman is going to regret ever messing with us. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early September. Marcus had filed our countersuit, and the judge had agreed to hear both cases together since they were directly related. The HOA's lawyer, a stern-looking man named Richard Bartlett, tried to get our counter-suit dismissed, but the judge denied the motion. "There appear to be legitimate questions of fact that need to be resolved," Judge Marilyn Chen said. "We'll proceed to trial." The trial itself was scheduled for November. As the date approached, I could feel the tension building. Marcus was confident, but I knew that nothing was guaranteed in court. I spent every spare moment reviewing documents, preparing my testimony, and trying not to let the stress overwhelm me. The night before the trial, I barely slept. My wife held my hand in the darkness, the soft hum of her ventilator a constant reminder of what this was really about. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll deal with it," she whispered. "Together." "I love you," I said. "I love you too." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but it was packed with people. Apparently, word had gotten around the neighborhood about the trial, and half of Meadowbrook Heights had showed up to watch. Patricia sat at the plaintiff's table with Richard Bartlett, looking confident and composed. I sat next to Marcus, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. Judge Chen entered, and we all stood. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that made me feel slightly better. At least she didn't look like someone who would tolerate any nonsense. "This is case number 2026 CV 8847, Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association versus Ethan Turner, with a related counter-suit filed by Mr. Turner. Mr. Bartlett, you may present your opening statement." Richard Bartlett stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about the rule of law and the importance of community standards. When Mr. Turner purchased his home in Meadowbrook Heights, he agreed to abide by the HOA's bylaws and regulations. These aren't arbitrary rules. They're carefully crafted standards designed to maintain property values and ensure a peaceful living environment for all residents. Mr. Turner has repeatedly and flagrantly violated these standards, accumulated thousands of dollars in legitimate fines, and refused to pay. We're asking the court to enforce the HOA's bylaws and order Mr. Turner to pay the outstanding fines, plus legal costs." Marcus stood next. "Your Honor, what Mr. Bartlett has described as legitimate fines is actually a systematic campaign of harassment targeting my client, because he had the audacity to keep his wife's life-saving medical equipment running during a power outage. The HOA president, Patricia Henderson, has abused her position to issue bogus violations and excessive fines in retaliation for Mr. Turner asserting his rights under the Fair Housing Act. We'll prove that the HOA has violated federal law, engaged in harassment, and caused significant emotional distress to both Mr. and Mrs. Turner. We're asking the court to invalidate the fines, award damages, and issue an order preventing further harassment." Judge Chen nodded. "Very well. Mr. Bartlett, call your first witness." The HOA's case was built primarily on documentation. They called Patricia to testify about the violations, presented photos of alleged infractions, and read from the bylaws repeatedly. To their credit, they had a lot of paperwork. But as Marcus had predicted, their case fell apart under cross-examination. "Mrs. Henderson," Marcus said, standing up for his cross-examination, "how many violation notices did you personally issue to Mr. Turner in the 3-month period following the February power outage?" Patricia shifted in her seat. "I'd have to review the records to give you an exact number. Let me help you. According to our count, you issued 47 separate violation notices. Does that sound correct, if you say so? And how many violation notices did you issue to other residents in Meadowbrook Heights during that same period?" Patricia hesitated. "I don't have that information in front of me." Marcus pulled out a document. "I've submitted a public records request to the HOA." According to your own files, you issued a total of 63 violation notices to all other residents combined during that same 3-month period. Does that mean Mr. Turner received nearly half of all violation notices issued in a community of over 200 homes? Mr. Turner had numerous violations, Patricia said defensively, or you targeted him specifically. Mrs. Henderson, can you explain why Mr. Turner received a violation notice for his grass being a 1/4 inch too long, when the photo evidence shows that his grass was identical in length to his neighbor's grass? I measured it personally. With what instrument? A measuring tape. You measured every blade of grass in Mr. Turner's lawn with a measuring tape. I measured a representative sample. And did you measure every other lawn in the neighborhood with the same diligence? Patricia's face flushed. I respond to complaints. Who complained about Mr. Turner's grass? I don't recall specifically. Was it you, Mrs. Henderson? I may have noticed it myself. Marcus let that hang in the air for a moment. Mrs. Henderson, on the night of February 14th, when Mr. Turner was running his generator to power his wife's ventilator, you called the police. Is that correct? Yes. And what did the police tell you? They said Mr. Turner could run his generator. They also told you that if you continued to harass Mr. Turner, you could face charges yourself. Isn't that correct? Patricia's jaw tightened. They may have said something to that effect. And yet, within 48 hours of that police visit, you issued 3 new violation notices to Mr. Turner. Doesn't that suggest that you were retaliating against him? I was enforcing the bylaws. You were harassing a man whose wife requires life-saving medical equipment. No further questions. The trial continued for 3 days. Marcus presented a devastating case, with testimony from my wife's doctors about the medical necessity of her equipment, expert witnesses on HOA law and the Fair Housing Act, and my own testimony about the pattern of harassment. We also presented the police reports from both incidents, including Officer Martinez's notes about warning Patricia to stop harassing me. Officer Martinez himself testified on the second day, describing both incidents in detail. In my professional opinion, Mrs. Henderson's behavior crossed the line from enforcing rules into harassment, he said. The generator was not creating a noise disturbance, and Mr. Turner had a clear medical necessity. Her continued pursuit of this matter, despite multiple warnings, showed a concerning pattern of behavior. Patricia's lawyer tried to salvage their case, but the evidence was overwhelming. By the 3rd day, even Judge Chen seemed frustrated with the HOA's arguments. Mr. Bartlett, she said during a break, I'm going to be frank with you. Your client's case is not going well. You might want to consider a settlement. But Patricia refused. She was convinced she was in the right, and she wanted her day in court. Richard Bartlett returned after the lunch break and informed the judge that the HOA would not be offering a settlement. Judge Chen sighed. Very well. Closing arguments. Both lawyers gave their final pitches. Marcus was eloquent and passionate, painting a picture of a family being tormented by a petty tyrant who couldn't accept that her rules didn't override federal law or basic human decency. Richard Bartlett did his best to frame the case as a simple matter of contract enforcement, but his heart didn't seem to be in it. Judge Chen took 2 days to render her decision. When we returned to the courtroom, the room was packed again. Patricia sat at her table, still looking confident, though I noticed her hands were gripping the edge of the table tightly. I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented in this case, Judge Chen began, and I'm prepared to issue my ruling. First, regarding the HOA's lawsuit for unpaid fines, I find that the majority of the violations cited were either fabricated, exaggerated, or part of a pattern of harassment targeting Mr. Turner in retaliation for his use of a generator to power medical equipment. The evidence clearly shows that Mr. Turner was singled out for enforcement actions, while his neighbors with identical alleged violations were ignored. Therefore, I'm dismissing the HOA's case in its entirety and invalidating all fines assessed against Mr. Turner from February forward. Patricia's face went white. I felt Marcus squeeze my shoulder gently. Judge Chen continued. Regarding Mr. Turner's countersuit, I find that the HOA, through its president Patricia Henderson, violated the Fair Housing Act by failing to provide reasonable accommodation for Mrs. Turner's disability, and by retaliating against Mr. Turner for asserting his rights under federal law. The pattern of harassment is clear and undeniable. I'm awarding Mr. Turner compensatory damages in the amount of $10,000 for emotional distress, and I'm ordering the HOA to pay all of his legal fees, which I understand total approximately $15,000. Furthermore, I'm issuing a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from interfering with Mr. Turner's use of medical equipment or issuing pretextual violations against him in the future. Any violation of this injunction will result in contempt charges. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Patricia looked like she might faint. I felt a wave of relief wash over me so powerful that I had to sit down. Additionally, Judge Chen said, raising her voice to be heard over the noise, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review. Mrs. Henderson's conduct, particularly her attempts to prevent the operation of life-saving medical equipment, may constitute criminal harassment or reckless endangerment. That determination will be made by the DA's office. Patricia stood up abruptly. Your Honor, this is outrageous. I was simply doing my job. Your job is not to endanger people's lives, Mrs. Henderson. If you have concerns about this ruling, you're welcome to file an appeal. But I warn you that if the pattern of harassment continues, you will find yourself facing criminal charges. This court is adjourned. Marcus and I stood as Judge Chen left the bench. I turned to shake his hand, but he pulled me into a quick hug instead. Congratulations, Ethan. You won. Outside the courtroom, several of my neighbors approached me to offer their congratulations. Apparently, Patricia had made herself unpopular with more than just me, and people were thrilled to see her get taken down a peg. That woman has been a nightmare for years, one elderly man told me. She tried to fine me for having the wrong color roses in my garden. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly, I was getting calls from reporters wanting to interview me about HOA overreach and disability rights. I did a few interviews, hoping that maybe our story would help other people dealing with similar situations. The district attorney did end up reviewing the case. 2 weeks after the trial, I got a call from an assistant DA named Jennifer Wu. Mr. Turner, I've been assigned to review the referral from Judge Chen regarding Patricia Henderson. I wanted to let you know that we've decided to file charges. Mrs. Henderson is being charged with criminal harassment and reckless endangerment. Given the circumstances and her lack of prior criminal history, we'll likely offer a plea deal, but I wanted to keep you informed. Thank you, I said, still processing. I never thought it would go this far. Your wife's life was put at risk because of Mrs. Henderson's actions. That's something we take very seriously. Patricia was arrested the following week. The local news covered it, showing footage of her being led out of her house in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. According to the news reports, she'd been offered a plea deal: plead guilty to harassment, attend anger management classes, perform community service, and resign from the HOA board. The reckless endangerment charge would be dropped. She took the deal. The HOA board held an emergency election, and Patricia was replaced by a mild-mannered retired teacher named George, who immediately reached out to apologize for everything that had happened and to assure me that things would be different going forward. The board has voted to revise our bylaws to include explicit exemptions for medical equipment, George told me over coffee one morning. We're also implementing new oversight procedures to prevent any board member from abusing their authority the way Patricia did. On behalf of the entire HOA, I want to apologize for what you and your wife went through. I appreciate that, I said. I never wanted to be at war with the HOA. I just wanted to be left alone to take care of my wife. And that's exactly what you'll get from now on. We're also dropping all pending violations against you, obviously. Clean slate. Life slowly returned to normal after that. The power went out one more time during a summer thunderstorm, and I ran my generator without incident. A few neighbors even came by to ask how my wife was doing and to thank me for standing up to Patricia. My wife's health stabilized somewhat. She still needed her ventilator at night, but a new medication regimen helped improve her breathing during the day. We started talking about the future again, making plans, dreaming about the life we wanted to build together. One evening, about 6 months after the trial, we were sitting on our back deck watching the sunset when she turned to me with a smile. "You know what I was thinking about today?" she asked. "What's that?" "How lucky I am to have you. A lot of people would have given up when things got hard, would have moved or backed down or just paid the fines to make it all go away. But you fought for us. You fought for me." I took her hand. "I'll always fight for you, always." "I know. That's why I'm lucky." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the neighborhood. Somewhere down the street, kids were playing. A dog was barking. Normal, peaceful suburban sounds. Patricia moved out of Meadowbrook Heights 3 months later. According to neighborhood gossip, the shame of the arrest and the civil judgment had been too much for her. She'd sold her house and moved to another state to live with her sister. I felt a twinge of something that might have been pity, but mostly I just felt relief that she was gone. The HOA sent out a newsletter announcing the changes to the bylaws, including the new medical exemptions. George wrote a long letter to all residents about the importance of compassion and community, and about how rules should serve people, not the other way around. Several people told me they thought the whole incident had actually made Meadowbrook Heights a better place to live. I framed the judge's ruling and hung it in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that standing up for what's right is worth it, even when it's hard. A reminder that bullies don't always win. A reminder that sometimes the system actually works the way it's supposed to. My wife's breathing equipment sat quietly in the corner of our bedroom, running faithfully every night. The generator sat in the garage, maintained and ready in case we ever needed it again. And I slept peacefully, knowing that if the power ever went out again, I could protect my wife without fear of harassment or legal threats. The story made its rounds in local HOA circles. Marcus told me he'd been contacted by several other homeowners dealing with similar situations, all of them emboldened by our victory, to stand up to their own petty tyrants. A local news station did a follow-up piece about HOA reform, using our case as an example of what can happen when HOAs overstep their authority. I even got a call from a state legislator who was proposing a bill to add more oversight and accountability requirements for HOAs in North Carolina. She wanted to use our story as part of her testimony before the state legislature. I agreed, hoping that maybe some good could come from all the stress and trouble we'd endured. "Your fight might help change the law," the legislator, Representative Sarah Mitchell, told me. That's going to protect thousands of families from going through what you went through. The bill passed 8 months later, with provisions requiring HOAs to accommodate medical equipment, limiting their fine authority, and creating an appeals process for homeowners who felt they were being unfairly targeted. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Years later, long after the drama had faded into memory, I still thought about those nights with the generator running, sitting up worried about my wife while dealing with Patricia's harassment. It had been one of the most stressful periods of my life, but it had also taught me something important about standing up for what matters. My wife's condition gradually improved with better treatments and careful management. We were eventually able to have the family we'd dreamed about, welcoming a daughter into our lives 2 years after the trial. She was healthy and happy, and watching her grow up in the house we'd fought so hard to keep made everything worthwhile. The neighborhood itself changed too. George's tenure as HOA president ushered in a new era of reasonable governance. Violations were still issued when necessary, but they were proportionate, fair, and applied consistently. The focus shifted from petty rule enforcement to actual community building, with neighborhood barbecues, charity drives, and improvements to common areas. I sometimes saw Patricia's former house when I drove by it. A nice young couple with twin boys had moved in, and they'd painted the shutters a different color and planted new flowers. Life had moved on, the way it always does. My generator sat ready in the garage, maintained and tested regularly, though we rarely needed it. When we did, I ran it without hesitation or fear, knowing that I had the legal right and the moral obligation to protect my family. That peace of mind was worth more than any amount of money. Looking back on the whole ordeal, I realized that the real victory wasn't the court ruling or the money or even Patricia's arrest and departure. The real victory was refusing to be bullied, refusing to accept that rules were more important than people's lives, and refusing to give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. Because, at the end of the day, that's what it was really about. Not generators or HOA bylaws or legal precedents, but about a husband fighting to protect his wife, a family refusing to be driven from their home, and a community learning that compassion matters more than conformity. The generator incident, as it became known in neighborhood lore, was a turning point. It showed that ordinary people could stand up to institutional power and win. It demonstrated that documentation, persistence, and the willingness to fight for what's right could overcome even the most determined opposition. And it proved that sometimes the system designed to protect the vulnerable actually does its job. My wife and I never moved from Meadowbrook Heights. We raised our daughter there, made lifelong friends, and built the life we'd always wanted. The house that had been the center of so much conflict became our haven, filled with love and laughter and the ordinary joy of daily life. And every night, when I heard the soft hum of my wife's ventilator, I was grateful. Grateful for the technology that kept her healthy, grateful for the legal system that protected us, grateful for the police officers who had been reasonable and professional, and grateful for the lawyer who had fought for us. But mostly, I was grateful that when it mattered most, I had refused to back down. That generator, still sitting ready in the garage, represented more than just a backup power source. It represented the line I had drawn in the sand, the moment I had decided that my family's safety and well-being were more important than keeping the peace with an unreasonable HOA president. It was a symbol of resistance, of protection, of love. Sometimes, late at night, I would stand at the bedroom window looking out at the quiet neighborhood. The streetlights would cast gentle pools of light on the peaceful streets. Houses would be dark, families sleeping safely in their beds. And I would think about how close we had come to losing this, to being driven out by harassment and intimidation. But we had survived. We had fought back. We had won. And in doing so, we had made things better not just for ourselves, but for everyone in the community. The new bylaws protected other families with medical needs. The oversight procedures prevented future abuse of power. The cultural shift from rigid rule enforcement to compassionate community building made Meadowbrook Heights a better place to live. Our daughter grew up hearing the story, learning from it the importance of standing up for yourself and others, of not backing down in the face of injustice, of fighting for what matters. She learned that rules should serve people, not rule them, and that power without accountability leads to abuse. These were valuable lessons, born from hardship but teaching wisdom that would serve her throughout her life. The generator ran one last time, years later, during a major ice storm that knocked out power for 3 days. By then, my wife's health had improved enough that she didn't need the ventilator anymore, but we still needed electricity for heat and food storage. The generator performed flawlessly, and several neighbors asked to run extension cords to their houses to keep their own essential appliances running. I said yes to every request, remembering what it felt like to be in desperate need and running up against unreasonable opposition. We became the neighborhood's power hub during that storm, with extension cords running like spider webs across lawns, keeping refrigerators cold and space heaters warm. George, still the HOA president, came by with coffee and donuts on the second day. "You're a good neighbor, Ethan," he said. "Always have been. I'm glad you decided to stay." "This is home," I replied simply. "Always has been." When the power finally came back on and the storm passed, I cleaned and stored the generator one more time, hoping it would be the last time I'd need it, but knowing it would always be ready if I did. It had served us well, that machine, becoming far more than just a piece of equipment. It had become a symbol of everything we'd overcome and everything we'd built. The story of the HOA, the generator, and the fight for our home became family history, passed down and remembered. It was a reminder of a difficult time, but also of triumph, of the power of persistence, and of the importance of standing up for what you believe in. Years turned into decades, and life continued its forward march. My wife's health remained stable. Our daughter grew and eventually left for college, and the neighborhood evolved with new families moving in and old ones moving out. But the lessons from those difficult months remained, embedded in the community's culture and in our family's story. I never forgot Patricia, though I long ago stopped being angry with her. She had been a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when you let power go to your head and forget that rules exist to serve people, not control them. I hoped she had learned from the experience, found peace wherever she ended up, and maybe even become a better person. But mostly, I focused on my own life, my own family, my own community. We had built something good here, something worth fighting for, and I was proud of the role I'd played in making Meadowbrook Heights a place where compassion and common sense prevailed over rigid adherence to arbitrary rules. The generator, now old and well-used but still reliable, remained in its spot in the garage, a silent sentinel standing ready to protect us if needed. Every time I walked past it, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude, remembering the nights it had run to keep my wife breathing, and the battle its operation had sparked. That battle had changed us, changed our community, and in a small way, changed the law. It had shown that one person, standing firm on principle and refusing to be intimidated, could make a real difference. It had proven that justice, though sometimes slow and difficult to obtain, was still possible, and that was worth everything we had gone through to get there.